one, and I put all the midterm grades up today, so they're in Canvas, and so we're halfway through the course pretty much. And here we are with authenticated encryption, and then I'll demonstrate another RSA project. So, all right. Now you can have a message authentication code, which we've already talked about, which protects a message authenticity but doesn't provide confidentiality. It's just like a hash value that you add to a message, although it's typically a keyed hash. And so you know the person who hashed it holds the private key, so that proves the message has not been altered, and it was sent by the person holding the private key, so you know who they are. But it doesn't provide confidentiality. It's just like a signature on a document. Authenticated encryption produces an authentication tag and encrypts the message, combining a cipher and a message authentication code, so now it is confidential and signed, so you know who sent it, and you know it hasn't been altered. So we'll talk about how you do this, and the most important one, AES-GCM, is the standard approved by the government, the only one, and then some new ones that are not yet approved but are arguably faster and better, which is the whole theme of all this. Almost all these encryption protocols have a system that was good enough that was approved 10 or 20 years ago, and in the meantime, cryptographers have invented better ones, but the official standard has not changed yet because the old standard is not really broken, it's just kind of inefficient, and nobody really cares too much about that. There's three ways to do it, to add a message authentication code to a plaintext document. You can have plaintext go through encryption to make ciphertext, and then you can separately send it through an authentication code hashing system and make a tag. This is encrypt and MAC as two separate operations, or you can calculate the message authentication code and then encrypt that along with the plaintext. Or you can encrypt the plaintext first and then calculate a MAC from the encrypted plaintext. Now, in principle, all these will accomplish the job. They will create ciphertext to protect confidentiality and a tag to provide integrity and authenticity. But they're not equal in terms of their security consequences. Encrypt and MAC is the least secure system, in theory, as you can just sort of guess, because if anything is wrong with either of these operations, you get to attack them separately. So if the MAC, for example, leaks information about the plaintext, which is possible because the MAC is only required to be unforgeable, not random. Remember, you can in principle use one of these weaker hashing systems that do not produce a random. You don't need to use a strong hashing system like SHA-1 or SHA-2. The only requirement here cryptographically is that it's unforgeable. It doesn't mean it's totally random, so it might in principle leak information about the plaintext. So this is not the most secure construction, but it is used by SSH. And SSH does this. Each encrypted packet is followed by this tag, which is the MAC of the key, a nonce, a sequence number, and then the plaintext. In practice, it's secure because the MAC they use is strong, because I think, they just used a SHA MAC. So if you actually use a strong hash algorithm like SHA, then it really is random. It doesn't leak any information. It's just that in principle, you're wasting some computer time because you're getting more security out of this MAC than you really need by the strict mathematical protocol required. So that's why it's okay. HMAC SHA-256 is secure. It's just perhaps a little wasteful of computer time, which is not a big deal. All right, MAC then encrypt is the other way. First you take the plaintext, calculate a tag, then you encrypt the whole mesh. This is more secure than encrypt and MAC, where you do them separately. It hides the plaintext tag, so it can't leak, so you never get to see the plaintext MAC tag. You only see the encrypted MAC tag. So what this means is you have to decrypt it, then you'll only be able to verify the message authentication tag. So even if this was a weak process here, it wouldn't matter. The layer of encryption will protect it. However, the disadvantage is you must decrypt it before you can authenticate it, and therefore, if I somehow put corrupted data in the decrypted data, you would get it before recognizing it's not authentic. In principle, it would be better to first know if it's authentic and not even bother decrypting it unless it's authentic. That's all right. This was used by TLS, but in version 1.3, they use authenticated ciphers we'll get to. This is considered the most secure system. You encrypt, and then you calculate the MAC on the encrypted data. The reason this is more secure is because the first thing you do at the other end is you verify the tag, and if it fails, you never bother decrypting it. So you efficiently determine if there's anything wrong with this, just throw it away. And don't bother with this decryption unless we know it's okay. So that's considered the strongest, and IPsec uses it. Although In practice, they're all fine as long as you use a good hash function. All right, so authenticated ciphers. This is different than having cipher and MAC because it will return an authentication tag, so you have a private key. Private key and plain text. You run it through authenticated encryption and you get ciphertext and a tag. And the tag proves not only that the message has not been altered, but that it was signed by the person holding the private key. So that's what you want. So to decrypt it, you have the key, the ciphertext, and the tag, and you are able to extract the plain text from that, and you're also able to determine that that plain text has not been altered and it came from the trusted sender by verifying the tag. All right, so the authentication should be as strong as a MAC, should be impossible to forge ciphertext and a tag. Confidentiality is stronger than a basic cipher. The decryption will fail unless the tag is valid, so you won't decrypt it unless it does pass the authenticity test, and therefore it prevents chosen ciphertext attacks, which are one of the things you can do on wireless networks. If I want to inject plain text into the system, it won't do any good because it won't decrypt them because I can't sign them. I don't have the private key. So it does block chosen ciphertext attacks, and that's good. Nobody's allowed to use the system at all unless they have the private key, which is what you normally would like. All right, then there's another thing you can have is associated data. You can add data which is not encrypted but is included by the tag. And so this is just sort of the all-purpose encryption system. So you feed in a key, plain text, and associated data, and then you get ciphertext, the associated data, and the tag. And the tag depends on both the plain text and the associated data. So it'll be rejected if the ciphertext is wrong or if the associated data is modified. It won't match the tag. So this is the AEAD system. And this means it replaces all the other systems. For example, if A is empty, then you don't have associated data, then it's just authenticated encryption. You're just encrypting plain text, there isn't any A, and you're producing ciphertext and a tag. If P is empty, then it's just MAC. You don't have any plain text, you don't have any ciphertext, you just have the associated data and you created a tag to label it with, so you have proved its authenticity, like a signature. So a good AEAD system will replace these others. All right, now identical plain text would have identical ciphertext, so to avoid that, you typically add a nonce that can never be reused. That makes it so even if you have another block of identical plain text and that you're the same private key holder, you will not have the same result here. So it will not be possible for the person at the other end without the key to know that you sent the same thing twice. All right, so a good authenticated cipher. Confidentiality should be as strong as a good cipher. The authenticity should be strong as a good MAC. And you would like to consider how bad it is if the nonce is repeated. You're not supposed to reuse a nonce, but in practice, it can happen due to various kinds of accidents, and you can determine how bad is it if it does happen. There's also performance, right? You want it to be parallelized so you can use the multiple cores in your processor. For example, we talked about this before. Counter mode is parallelizable in AES. Cipher block chaining is not parallelizable. You have to calculate the first block before you can do the second block before you can do the third block, and so on. So then you can consider the internal structure. If it's 2 layers, first you have to encrypt it, and then you have to calculate the authentication from that. If you're building special hardware, that might be more expensive. It might be slower. You might prefer something that's only got 1 layer. You might want something that is streamable, so you can have a large message that's processed block by block, and you don't need to have enough memory to hold the whole message, just enough to hold 1 block. Another thing you might want, sometimes you have to have the auxiliary data before the plain text data. Others you can place it elsewhere. Some require 2 separate algorithms, one for encryption and one for decryption. But in some of these, you can use the same algorithm for both. We've talked about these. AES-GCM has a different encryption routine than a decryption routine, but AES-CTR doesn't, because it uses the key and the counter mode to create a stream of bits, and then it just XORs the data with the bits. And to decrypt it, you just XOR it again with the same stream of bits. So the same algorithm is the encryption and decryption, and that might make it cheaper to build hardware doing this. So these are other things you might consider when choosing an algorithm. And like I say, this is the one that is currently the winner. That's why I added it to that project with the Penguin. We should all get used to using AES-GCM. This is currently considered the best one we should all be using, Galois counter mode. It's a version of counter mode. It uses a small algorithm to compute this authentication tag. And so, as the most widely used authenticated cipher, and it's actually a NIST standard, part of the NSA Suite B, so it's used by a lot of things approved by the US government, like IPsec and TLS 1.2. So, it is encrypt, then MAC. You have a 128-bit key here. You have a 96-bit nonce, and it uses polynomial multiplication with a hash key. So you have plain text blocks coming in here. So you feed the nonce and the key into AES, just like other things. Then you create a bit stream. Then you XOR the plain text with the bit stream to make the cipher stream. This is just like AES-GCM. You got 2 blocks of ciphertext here. Then you feed in the associated data here and pass them through a couple of XOR operations, and out here you get the tag. And the tag includes a nonce, so even if you repeat the plain text and associated data again, you won't get the same answer. And that's it. That's the structure of it. It's simple and fast. That's how it goes. And they explain what polynomial multiplication is here, which I don't plan to go into, but there are ways to make it faster. So the security. It turns out to be fragile if the nonce is repeated. If you repeat the nonce, then the AES part is identical, and therefore you're XORing with the same bit stream. And therefore, if they can get an authentication key and forge tags. This did happen in 2016. There were some servers that were found with repeated nonces, including some that were programmed using all zeros. These are just programmers failing to correctly implement the protocol, which does happen. They just don't do what they should do. So encryption and decryption are parallelizable. The MAC is not. It's streamable, though. And so it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Like I said, it's good enough that it's the standard, and these other ones I'm going to talk about are improvements that have not yet become standardized because AES-GCM is considered good enough. So OCB is an authenticated faster that's cipher, that's faster, developed in 2001, but licensed until 2013, so you'd have to pay to use it. And why would anybody pay when you could just use AES-GCM instead? It blends encryption and authentication into one layer with one key. Each block of plain text is encrypted with a block cipher, with a key and an offset, and so on, and a nonce and so on. So it's relatively similar, but the tag XORs all the blocks of plain text together, and then XORs that with an offset computed from the last block's offset. So anyway, it's a way to create a tag and just a lot of XOR operations, so it's faster. Also supports associated data that you can calculate. So it's considered better than GCM. Repeated nonces will harm it less. And it's considered, in practice, it's about as fast as GCM. Parallelizable and streamable. And OCB requires 2 functions instead as opposed to 1 function for GCM. So, in practice, it did not have a huge advantage, and it would have cost money and be the non-standard, so it never has caught on yet. There's another one, probably even better, called SIV, a synthetic IV, an authenticated cipher mode used with AES, secure even if you use the same nonce twice. Attacker will only see a repeat if the same complete plain text is repeated. All right. Not only the first block, which is nice. So it's got an encryption function, a pseudo-random function, 2 keys and a nonce, and a tag. And so it's not streamable. It has to have the whole plain text in memory, so that's annoying. If you want to encrypt 100 gigabytes of plain text, you have to store 100 gigabytes. So that is perhaps a disadvantage of it. All right. Anyway, then there's another one called permutation-based AEAD. Now, permutation is where you just rearrange things without changing them, like Scrabble letters. So that's what permutation is. You have the output is the same length as the input with just the things mixed around. Now, you have to do more than permute to have any security, but it's one of the operations. And permutation-based authenticated encryption with associated data, you start with an internal state H0, you XOR it with a key and a nonce, and you permute it with plaintext blocks to get new internal states. This produces pseudo-random blocks. You then XOR them at plain text to make the ciphertext. This sounds rather like that one with 256 things that you shuffled like a deck of cards that was quite popular for a long time, another encryption routine. The ciphertext is the same length as the plain text. The internal state is large, but you take any number of bits you want from the last internal state to form the tag. So you can have tags of different sizes. So the security relies on the secrecy of the internal state. Nonce reuse is only a small problem. And so it's streamable with a single layer of operations, but it's not parallelizable. And things that can go wrong. Okay, what you want confidentiality and authenticity, so you have plain text and associated data, and you want to make sure that it remains secure for all P's and A's, even, for example, when one is absent or all zeros or all F's or anything like that. So that's your attack surface. You consider attackers who collect many message tag pairs and that may find cases where the nonce is repeated, and you would like your scheme to be resistant to all those attacks. So ghash uses a hash key over and over. It takes the hash squared, the hash cubed, the hash to the fourth value, just keeps hashing it over and over and over, which we talked about before, talking about the row method to find hash collisions. And the problem with that is there are some, we saw before, when you do that, eventually you form a loop where it just goes around the same values over and over. And certain values of H have a short cycle, like it will repeat every 3 or 4 blocks. So if that was to happen, that would in principle be a weakness. If the H had a cycle of 5, you could take the first and sixth block of ciphertext and swap them, and it would have the same authentication tag. So in principle, that would enable tag forgery. Now there's a similar problem here with electronic codebook encryption. If each block is encrypted separately, and you're encoding something like a web request that has parameters in it, then here you have UID equals a number, and if you swap this block and that number will turn to 1, which makes you the root. So this is the kind of thing, even if you can't decrypt things, if you can swap a couple of blocks of this, it can end up having bad results, if you're lucky, and it happens to turn something that remains meaningful and changes you to a different user or something. So that's, in principle, the consequences of tag forgery. In practice, it's not easy to exploit. You'd have to take something and then try flipping all kinds of pairs until one of them got through by luck. They say in practice, it's not likely that you would actually accomplish anything with this attack, but in principle, it's a theoretical defect of AES-GCM. Here's another one. You can use smaller tags, like we were talking about. You can make tags that are only 32 or 48 bits in size, and those might fool you because they're much weaker than they appear. You might imagine that a 48-bit tag is 48 bits of security, but it's in fact only 24 bits of security. For some reason, it is the length of the message matters here, and they said it was beyond the checking of your book to prove this, but these 128-bit tags are fine, but these shorter tags are a lot less secure than you think they are, if anybody's going to use them. I don't know who would use a short tag. Obviously, you should use a 128-bit tag, but anyway, people might design systems trying to be stingy using these short tags, and they might get fooled because they're less secure than they appear to be. Anyway, let's try a Kahoot. All right. By the way, I wonder if something new is wrong with LastPass. Both of my machines have forced me to relog into LastPass, and they forced me to resynchronize my two-factor authentication, which was very difficult. So I have the feeling that LastPass just forced resets, which suggests they got hacked again. I haven't seen a report that they got hacked again, but I notice here it's warning me again my LastPass is hosed. And usually that doesn't happen unless something bad happened. So this will help motivate me to move to Bitdefender, which is what I should really be doing. LastPass has fouled up too many times. Anyway, let's try a Kahoot. I see a question. Stop using it after the hack. Wouldn't be surprised if they did get hacked again. No, neither would I. That's the thing. I should probably move all my stuff to some other. They tell me Bitdefender's good. Well, I really don't know. But it'd be a good idea to move on them. I think we'll be seeing them in the security news pretty soon. They might already be there. I haven't noticed a security article about it, but I don't think it'll be long. Might just be that my stuff expired, but it didn't happen before and I've been using it for years. So I think this means something bad has happened. I'll wait a few more seconds, see if we get any more players. If we only have 3, it kind of defeats the concept of competition. However, we will carry on anyway. All right. Someone else says they think Bitdefender is good. Yeah, good. Okay. All right. So which one of these does not provide confidentiality? This one, the E is encryption. This message authentication code is the one that does not have any encryption. It just puts a mark on the message that acts like a signature. You can verify who sent it and that it hasn't been altered, but it does not provide confidentiality. Sort of thing you might do to sign like a software update, where you just want to make sure that it is genuine and it hasn't been altered, but you're not intending to encrypt it. All right, which one is the NIST standard? Yep, AES-GCM. I say we should all get used to using it. It's the current recommended standard. All right. All right, which system might leak information about the plaintext? Encrypt and MAC separately. In principle, this MAC operation might leak some information about the plaintext. These include a layer of encryption, so it protects it, but that one is considered unnecessarily dangerous for that reason. All right, which system can tag data for authenticity but not provide confidentiality? It has the capacity to do that. Okay. It's a little hard to understand. The point is this has the ability to do that. This has this associated data, which is not encrypted, but is signed. So that's the point. The rest of these don't have that option. They all provide encryption. This provides encryption optionally, but you can also choose not to use it and just have the associated data. Little bit confusing question there. Anyway, there's not a lot of suspense about the winners. All right. So I'm going to stop this recording.